I am very much honored to be invited to speak on this program, and I hope that I can make some contribution to your knowledge of the Bible. Let me say, however, that Brother Wendell Winkler overdrew some matters when he referred to me as knowing a great deal about the prophets of the Old Testament. If the brethren do not know, preacher brethren particularly, do not know more than I know, the church is in a bad shape. I do enjoy studying the prophets, and I have taught the prophets every year, I suppose, for the last 34 or 5 years. There were no writing prophets prior to the divided kingdom. Writing prophets, that is. But from the point of the writing prophets on through to the end of the Old Testament, the prophets figured prominently in the history of the nation of Israel. Today we are faced with the liberals on the one hand and the dispensationalists on the other. The dispensationalists aver that they believe every word of the prophets, literally. On the other hand, the liberals say that there is no such thing as the element of predictive prophecy. And on this basis, the liberals attack the book of Isaiah and the book of Daniel with a very ferocious or in a very ferocious manner. As a matter of fact, if they allow anything in the book of Isaiah or anything in the book of Daniel to stand in relationship to predictive prophecy, then all of their doctrine goes out the window. A.B. Davidson has defined the mission of a prophet. He said that a prophet was a man of his own time, that he spoke always to the people of his own time, that he spoke always to the people of his own time about things that concerned them, that the prophet has not spoken to a people of a later time, and that he has not spoken for us or to us. And on this basis, A.B. Davidson and those of his kind eliminate all of the elements of predictive prophecy. When a young man goes off to a seminary and some college professor sets forth the principles as per A.B. Davidson, and the young man speaks up and says, "Professor, what about the prophecies of Isaiah concerning Cyrus?" Isaiah prophesied some 150 to 60 years concerning Cyrus, and that before Cyrus came upon the scene of history. The professor says, "You do not understand. There were two Isaiahs. The first Isaiah wrote chapters 1 through 35. The second Isaiah lived in Babylon. He was a kind of Dean Kaltenborn person. He was observing the rise of Cyrus, and he stepped out and made a number of conjectural predictions, some of which came to pass. All of his predictions, however, were within the range of cause and effect. Well, we make predictions. Someone said that the people over in Texas was predicting relative to a recent football game. And sometimes the predictions come to pass within the range of cause and effect. This is the manner in which the liberal takes care of the element of predictive prophecy as pertains to the book of Isaiah. In short, he changes the situation and reduces the scope of the prophecy. He brings it within the bounds of cause and effect. Relative to the book of Daniel, the liberal says that the book of Daniel is a pseudepigrapha book. Now, do not ask me to spell the word. I have not been able to pronounce it too long ago. Anyway, a book of history written after the fact as if it were prophecy. The average liberal assigns the date of about BC 80 to the book of Daniel. I mention the book of Isaiah, however, all because, as is set forth by the liberals, so the conservatives agree to a point. The first 35 chapters of the book of Isaiah has as its burden Assyria. Then there comes a historical section, chapters 36 and 37 and 38 and 39, and then from chapters 40 through 66, the burden of the book, the burden of the prophet Isaiah was Babylon. The historical section should be seen, I think, in a different light from that which is generally the case of its being understood. Isaiah was preaching to the nation that they should not go to Egypt for help. His theme was, you must go to Jehovah. And ultimately, when the crisis came, Hezekiah did go to Jehovah. And as a result of that, the angel of the Lord went through the camp of the Assyrians in one night and destroyed 185,000. So, chapters 36 and 37 are placed where they are in order to show that all that Isaiah preached concerning Assyria and how that the people should go to Jehovah and that he would save them came to pass. Then chapters 38 and 39 give us an account of how that Hezekiah became quite prideful after this. The nations bore gifts to the altar in Jerusalem and to Hezekiah in recognition of the divine intervention of the Jews' God. And as a result of this, God was angry with Isaiah, and he was angry with the nation of Judah. And Isaiah was stricken ill. The prophet, or Hezekiah was stricken ill. Hezekiah, not Isaiah. And Isaiah came to Hezekiah and said, set your house in order, for thou shalt die and not live. The king Hezekiah turned his face to the wall and wept bitterly. And as a result of this, Isaiah was sent back to Hezekiah to say, I have added 15 years to your life. About this time, Merodach-Baladan sent ambassadors to Hezekiah. Merodach-Baladan was king of the city-state of Babylon. And whenever a weak king was on the throne in Nineveh, his weakness was an invitation for one of the stronger kings to throw off the yoke, the tribute. Merodach-Baladan had this in mind, and he sent ambassadors to inquire about the wonder of the land. He sent them on pretense of inquiring about Hezekiah's health. Hezekiah was all puffed up over this matter. He was quite prideful, and Isaiah showed on the scene and inquired, who were these men? Hezekiah said, they have come all the way from Babylon to inquire about my welfare, about my health. Isaiah said, what have they seen in thy house, And Hezekiah said, all that is in my house, my riches, my wealth, all of this, they have seen. And then Isaiah announced, yes, behold, the days are coming when all that is in thy house and that which thy fathers have laid up in store until this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, saith Jehovah. And then he said, and of thy sons that shall issue from thee, whom thou shalt beget, shall they take away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. This was the announcement. And this was the basis for the second division of Isaiah. Instead of there being three divisions, chapters 1 through 35 with the burden, Assyria, and then the historical section, and then chapters 40 through 66 with the burden, Babylon. The case is that chapters 1 through 37 is the first division, ending with the historical section, and thereby showing that all that Isaiah had preached came to pass. The second division, beginning with chapter 38 and going on through 66, with the burden of Babylon, the chapters 38 and 39, historical, are set where they are to show the foundation for all that Isaiah wrote thereafter. Isaiah was put on notice that his people would one day go to Babylon. And as a result of this, he lived by the Spirit as it were a second lifetime. And he wrote a book which was calculated to assist and encourage the people when they were in Babylon. He wrote this book further to prepare Cyrus to set the people free. And when we look in on the book of Daniel, or look in on Daniel, he was sent to Babylon as a young man. And he was there from the beginning of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar until the third year of the reign of Cyrus, at least that long. And this Daniel occupied a very high position in the government, and no doubt was the very one who carried the book of Isaiah to Cyrus and read from it how that the prophet Isaiah had prophesied for Jehovah and said that Cyrus will set my people free. Josephus states that the book of Isaiah was carried to Cyrus, and that this promoted him or motivated him to set the people free. And I have no doubt but that Daniel was the very person who presented this book to the king. Anyway, this leads us to the point of how that there were three carryings away to Babylon. The first carrying away was in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, at which time the fine young men were carried to Babylon. And when we open up the book of Daniel, we find that Daniel and his three companions were of the seed royal. So the prophecy that had been made by Isaiah of how that the sons or grandsons, great-grandsons of Hezekiah would be eunuchs in Babylon came to pass. Now for the rest of the time, as far as I can go this morning, I think I will give an outline of the book of Daniel, which will set the study for the elements of and abuses of the premillennialists with reference to the book of Daniel. As for a brief outline, there are three divisions. First, the introductory section, which pertains to Daniel's personal history. Second, the historical section, chapters 2 through chapter 6. And then the last or third section, which is concerned with symbols, chapters 7 through chapter 12. To look more specifically at this, in chapter 1 we learned that Daniel was of the tribe of Judah. He was of the seed royal, that is, he was a descendant of the royal kings of Judah. He was a youth, probably from 17 to 23 years of age, and likely nearer 23 than 17. He was a youth of superior intelligence and one in whom there was no blemish, and he was carried to Babylon, as we just mentioned, along with other youths of Judah by the order of Nebuchadnezzar, which order was given in 605 BC. Daniel was carried to Babylon as a captive at the very beginning of the 70-year captivity of Judah. This captivity had been predicted by Isaiah in Jeremiah 25 and 11 and in Jeremiah 29 and 10. He, along with these other youths, was castrated. He was then placed in school for a 3-year program of study. Daniel was a youth of sterling qualities and of strong conviction, as the first chapter of Daniel will show. He was a youth of unusual wisdom, and God chose him as an agent to perform God's great work upon Babylon. And that work was in behalf of Judah. We moved from this introductory section to the historical section of Daniel. And the book of Daniel was written in 2 languages, the Hebrew and the Aramaic. The first section, chapter 1 to chapter 2, verse 3, was written in the Hebrew language. And the second section, chapter 2, verse 3, through chapter 7, was written in the Aramaic. At that point of time, the Aramaic language was the official literary dialect which had currency in all parts of the Near East, and this fact needs to be understood. The liberals who attacked Daniel for one attack of the liberals is at the point of the book having been written in 2 different languages. But this is as it should be. In reality, the Aramaic of Daniel was a kind of court language, and the fact that the historical section of Daniel is written in the Aramaic is a strong indication that that section of the book was lifted from certain court records which had been recorded by none other than Isaiah himself. In short, the history was concerned with the great Babylonian Empire and was recorded in their language, whereas the messages which concerned the Jews was written in the Hebrew and after the order of the symbolic language. The first division of this historical section is an account of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Nebuchadnezzar was troubled by his dream, though he could not recall it, all of which was to be a means of God's message to the great masses of Gentiles, and also a means of protection and ultimate deliverance of the Jews. Actually, the lesson contemplated the coming of Christ. Nebuchadnezzar called in the wise men of the kingdom to give him the dream and the interpretation, and when those men had failed, he decreed that all of the wise men should be put to death. This interdict included Daniel and the 3 Hebrew companions. Under these circumstances, the 3 companions of Daniel were in company with him on learning of the interdict, and they prayed unto Jehovah. Jehovah gave Daniel the dream and the interpretation of the dream. In this dream, Nebuchadnezzar saw a form which was terrible. The image had a head of fine gold. Its breast and arms were of silver, its belly of brass, and its legs of iron, and its feet part of iron and part of clay. Daniel said to Nebuchadnezzar, "Thou art this head of gold, and after thee shall arise another kingdom, and another kingdom, and another kingdom. And in the days of those kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, neither shall the sovereignty thereof be left to the people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all other kingdoms." In his dream, Nebuchadnezzar saw that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote this image in its feet and break the image into pieces. And the stone that was smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. In short, in the days of the Roman kings, that would be the fourth kingdom, the God of heaven would set up a kingdom. In the days of those kings, the vision contemplated four world empires: the Babylonian, the Medo-Persian, the Grecian, and the Roman. And in the days of the Roman kings, God would set up a kingdom which should stand forever, and the sovereignty thereof would never be left to the people. These four world empires were a part of God's plan and preparation for the advent of Christ into the world. The Babylonian Empire was raised up to make its contribution. The Medo-Persian Empire was raised up to make its contribution. The Grecian Empire was raised up to make its contribution. And the Roman Empire was raised up to make its contribution. The Babylonian Empire contributed the synagogue of the Jews. Those Jews were carried to Babylon, and it was there that they were compelled to worship God where they were and apart from the temple. Thus there began the synagogue order of worship. Now, when the New Testament opens, there were synagogues everywhere, and those synagogues served as launching pads, so to speak, for the gospel of Christ. When the apostles went out, they went to the synagogues first, and there they had a prepared audience to a measurable degree at least. The Medo-Persian Empire was raised up out of the dust of the Babylonian Empire. It contributed a high degree of acceptance and respect for law and order. The law of the Medes and Persians altereth not, was a statement that was made again and again. Their respect for law and order so permeated the succeeding world empires that when Christ came on the scene of action, there was a reign of law and order and enforced peace, which the world had never seen before and has never seen since. That enforced peace very significantly facilitated the apostles and early evangelists in their proclamation of the gospel. The Grecian Empire, which came up next, contributed a nigh universal language. Alexander the Great, educated at the feet of the Grecian philosopher Aristotle, infused the Grecian language, the Grecian knowledge, and the Grecian culture among the conquered peoples. The result was that the Greek language became a nigh universal language, and that fact contributed significantly to the proclamation of the gospel. The New Testament was written in Greek, which thing was very fortunate because the language had the capacity for the expression of fine and delicate distinctions and relationships. You've heard the expression, the Greeks have a word for it, and such was and is the case of the Grecian language. Then came the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire contributed all the three previous empires had contributed. It contributed also a worldwide enforced peace. There were no customs. The apostles and early evangelists were free to move from one country to another. Further, the Roman Empire contributed a high standard of legal citizenship rights, which in turn and through providential means provided that the Roman Empire became the protectorate of the church. As a matter of fact, cradled the church during its early years. And I think that probably brethren have not been particularly impressed with all the contribution that the Roman Empire, inadvertently I should say, made to the infant church. The second subdivision of the historical section is an account of how that Daniel's three companions, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, were thrown into a fiery furnace because they refused to fall down and worship the great image of gold which Nebuchadnezzar had made. But this proved to be quite providential, for when they had been thrown into the fiery furnace, and Nebuchadnezzar saw them walking about in the fire and another person with them, he became tremendously concerned. The book of Daniel says that an angel was with them, or implies. And so Nebuchadnezzar called unto them, and when they had come forth from the fiery furnace, the king became quite penitent, and he advanced those three men so that they had greater influence in the kingdom than ever before. The third division of the historical section then is a penitent account by Nebuchadnezzar himself of his extol and honor to the King of heaven for having granted him respite and recovery from his 7 years of madness, which madness was brought upon him as a punishment for his idolatrous, arrogant conduct. This is contained in chapter 4. The fourth chapter opens with a decree of King Nebuchadnezzar to all the peoples and nations and languages that dwell on all the earth. He declared, "It hath seemed good unto me to show the signs and wonders that the Most High God wrought unto me. How great are his signs, and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation." What a testimony this was, and especially for the testimony to come from a cruel, arrogant, and heathen king, as such as Nebuchadnezzar was. Then Nebuchadnezzar proceeded to relate the reasons for his testimony regarding the Most High God. And in his dream, which he had seen a tree in the midst of the earth, grew up, and its height was reached unto heaven. And the beast of the field shadowed under it, and the birds of the heaven dwelt in its branches, and all flesh was fed from it. In turn, though, the watchman and a holy one came down from heaven and cried, "Hew down the tree, cut it off, shake off its leaves, scatter its fruit." And then the watchers further cried, "Let his portion be with the beast, let his heart be changed for a man's, and let a beast's heart be given unto him, and let 7 times 7 pass over him, to the intent that the living may know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the lowest of men." Nebuchadnezzar told this dream to his wise men, but they were unable to give him an interpretation. Then he sent for Daniel. Observe the prominence of Daniel. He sent for Daniel. When Daniel heard the dream, he was stricken dumb. He was speechless. and trouble. Nebuchadnezzar protested, "Let not the dream or the interpretation trouble you." Daniel replied, and this is significant, "My Lord, the dream be to them that hate you, and the interpretation thereof to thine adversaries." The point is that Daniel had become quite fond of Nebuchadnezzar. After all, he had been Nebuchadnezzar's preacher, his advisor for more than 20 years at that time. In his interpretation of the dream, Daniel said, "This is the decree of the Most High. Thou shalt be driven from men, and thy dwelling place shall be with the beasts of the field. And 7 times shall pass over thee, till thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, but the kingdom shall be made sure unto thee." Daniel then urged Nebuchadnezzar that he said, "Break off thy sins by righteousness, and thine iniquities by showing mercy to the poor, if there be a lengthening of thy tranquility." Nebuchadnezzar persisted, though, in his arrogance and obstinacy, and at the end of 12 months he was walking in the royal palace and reflecting on great Babylon, and he was reflecting how that, is this not great Babylon that I have built? Then a voice came forth, and the announcement is made. He would be driven from men. In short, at this very time, Nebuchadnezzar became a madman, and for 7 years, then he was without the use of his mental capacities. But strangely enough, and how providential this was, after 7 years, this man got his kingdom back. I'm confident that his son, Evil-Merodach, must have contributed significantly to his being raised to his old position. Anyway, this Evil-Merodach showed great favor toward the Jews. He took Jeconiah from prison and set him on a throne among the other kings in Babylon, conquered kings, that is, and then he set him above the others. Evil-Merodach was assassinated after a reign of 2.5 years by his brother-in-law, Neriglissar, and the assassination may have come about as a result of Evil-Merodach's having showed so much favor to the Jews. The 4th subdivision of the historical section is an account of Jehovah's judgment against Belshazzar. Belshazzar was a co-regent with his father Nabonidus. Incidentally, here were the rulers of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar reigned for 43 years. He was succeeded by Evil-Merodach, who reigned for 2.5 years, and he was assassinated, and Neriglissar, his brother-in-law, reigned for 3 years, and then Laborsicad reigned for some 9 months, and then came Nabonidus, who reigned for 16 years. And associated with Nabonidus on the throne was Belshazzar, his son. And so when we read in Daniel how that Belshazzar was king, there is no historical record, or was not until recent date, that would indicate that he had any position of reign. Now, the spade has turned up certain significant records which would prove as much. Anyway, this Belshazzar was a co-regent. And in this particular division, Belshazzar had planned a great feast, and he ordered that the cups and all that had been taken out of the temple and carried to Babylon should be brought, so that they could drink wine from those vessels. And while this drunken feast was underway, a finger appeared and wrote on the wall. Belshazzar was stricken with fear. He called for the wise men, and they could not read the writing nor give the interpretation. And then the queen mother, this would have been Nebuchadnezzar's widow, entered the banquet hall and urged that Daniel be brought in. And Daniel was brought in. Daniel had been faded out of government, no doubt, from the time of evil Merodach's assassination until this very evening. And when he was thus, at this time, he was thus faded back in, as the history will show. Anyway, Nebuchadnezzar's widow sent for Daniel, and Daniel came, was brought in. Belshazzar did not know Daniel. He had heard of him, but he did not know him. Anyway, Daniel interpreted the handwriting on the wall. And it was that very night that Belshazzar was slain. And Darius the Mede received the kingdom. Now, Babylon did not fall on that night. It merely changed government, so to speak. This, according to Olmsted, who died just a few years ago, an authority in Persian history, and one who was very, very critical of Nehemiah, accounted for the fall of Babylon overnight, so to speak, on the basis that Nabonidus was out gathering up gods and carrying them to Babylon and making Babylon a center of the gods. Babylon's god was Marduk, and the priest of Marduk resented this, and they cooperated with the Medes so that the course of the river was changed. The drawbridges were left open, as the legends go. But primarily, Babylon changed government all overnight through the influence and power and direction of those priests. Darius the Mede stormed the palace and took over the reins of government. And thus Babylon changed hands, so to speak. But Babylon's complete desolation did not come until the 6th year of Darius. With Cyrus, 9 years. With Cambyses, his son, 7 years. With Pseudo-Smyrtus, about a year. And then came Darius. This moves us all the way down to the history of the return. And in the 6th year of Darius, the temple was completed. And when the temple was completed and the Jews were rejoicing over that fact, Babylon was being reduced to the ground. It was burned, sacked, and thus Babylon fell. Tomorrow we'll begin with the 6th chapter and the influence that came through Darius the Mede, having taken over Babylon. It was at this point and time that Daniel was made next to the king himself and occupied that position until Cyrus arrived. The book of Daniel says that Daniel prospered all the days of Darius and all the days of Cyrus. Whenever our good sisters talk about Daniel, young, dynamic, athletic type young man being thrown into a lion's den, they do not have a proper conception, for Daniel would have been at that time about 93 years of age. He was castrated when he was a young man, and his voice was probably high and shrill. Anyway, Darius is coming. Darius the Mede was the fulfillment of Isaiah the 13th chapter. Behold, I will stir up the Medes against them who shall regard silver, and as for gold, they shall not delight in it, so on. The Medes were the first to arrive in Babylon in keeping with the prophecy. We'll start here next time.